Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 185. I'm delighted to be joined today by David Guest, lead academy sports scientist at Rangers. David, how are we doing?
Thanks very much for having us. Very well, thank you.
Good, man. Thank you for coming on. It'll be great to catch up. We were just talking then that we've got loads of stuff we want to cover. So we'll see what we can fit into the podcast, and maybe even before we started, there might be a part 2 lined up. We'll see how we go. Well, David, kick us off like we always do. It's always good to hear about your background, your story that's led up to your role now. So do you want to take us through that to start with?
Yeah, so I think my background probably just preface it and say that if I was to look back sort of 12 years ago when I was sort of 18, starting out in university and just where I thought my career was going to go and where I'd end up being, probably just never thought, like, even for 1 second, that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. So kind of a long journey, a bit of a few different directions that I've taken, but I think certainly it's helped us become the sort of practitioner that I am now that I've got here. So started out, if I started back from then, so when I was 18, I was a decathlete, so competing sort of to a reasonably high level. In 2010, I'd actually competed in a GB competition in Bonpass in France, broke the GB indoor heptathlon record, broke the current world record holder. Kevin May, actually beat him in a competition when I was competing. Went to the outdoor season, ranked world number 1 for the junior decathlon. Finished 4th in the World Juniors that year. I was based down in Cardiff, so that's where I grew up. And then sort of that summer, then transferred from Cardiff Met, where I started my first year in uni, moved to Loughborough. I actually met my wife when we were competing in the World Juniors in Canada, so moved across there, and it worked quite well because we were sort of just started going out. We were both on funding, so both on UK Athletics funding, but it probably didn't take too long until things, I wouldn't say unraveled, but like both had a few injuries, and we both went from being quite good, promising juniors on that sort of UK Athletics funding track to sort of go on and kick on towards World Championships, Olympic Games. Those were our aims, really. But I think when you drop out of that funding circle, it becomes quite difficult. There's not really a lot of support, so you have to go and get a job, and you have to kind of support yourself that way. So for the decathlon, I was basically training sort of 4 or 5 hours a day. I was coaching. I ended up coaching her as well, because I'd had all my UK Athletics coaches, and then for one reason or another, I ended up coaching myself at 20, coaching her as well. And then I had my own little sprints group as well, which I was doing for the uni as well. So pretty much 6-7 hours a day, I was down the track, and that was all I wanted to do. So I was still doing my undergrad degree, but it was almost like just on the side kind of thing. Didn't particularly enjoy it, didn't really want to be involved in it, but sort of knew that it was good to sort of have. And yeah, like just almost struggled for the next couple of years. Didn't really do anything myself in terms of competing, because again, injuries just sort of stunted that. I ended up having patella tendon injuries, and then having like a broken foot, and then I couldn't take off in the pole vault. So just one thing after another, until 2014, when finally got everything going again. Qualified for the Commonwealth Games, came 8th. The work that I've been obviously doing with my wife up until that point, she ended up getting a Commonwealth bronze medal. Graduated from Loughborough University then in that summer. So by 2014, I was in a situation where I'd finished my degree. Didn't actually get any recognition, any sort of funding coming off the back of the Commonwealth Games, and I was a little bit lost almost. I was a little bit like, not really sure what to do now. Wanted to be a coach, spent all my time down there. Had some reasonable, obviously, success with myself and then with my wife. But I think maybe just the fact that I was young, maybe the fact that I was competing myself as well, probably didn't go in my favor. So we ended up moving back to where she's from, up in Newcastle, and for one reason or another, ended up getting a job in a builder's merchant. So completely different, something completely different, but working in sales. Ended up doing that for 3 years, and I enjoyed it. I think sales is obviously quite a good environment because it's competitive. So having those targets, trying to build relationships with customers, trying to win those big contracts, that was quite exciting. But in the end, it wasn't really for me. I think just having that experience as an athlete, having that experience working in sport, I just really wanted to get back into it, but I didn't quite know how. So I had a bit of a break in, must have been 2017, 2018. Went on a big holiday, went to propose. That's when I proposed to my wife in New York. We then went to Sydney and New Zealand, had a bit of a break, and just had a bit of a clear headspace, and just thought, like, I almost need to make a change now, otherwise I'm going to end up being further down the road, and then it's going to be more difficult. So I'd always said that I was never going to go back to uni. Like when I finished my undergrad, I was like, that is me done. Like I'm not an academic in any way. So did a bit of research, sort of came to the conclusion quite quickly that was something that I would have to do, but I also would need to get experience as well at the same time. So I think some of the things that I came across at the time was Nick Grantham's book, You're Hired, Steve Ingham's Letter to the 15,000, just looking at a few just job adverts that I was sort of interested in at the time. So did my master's in strength and conditioning part-time. So that first year, just really trying to get as much experience as possible. So I ended up getting a placement at Newcastle United, just primarily went with the 18s. There was a private academy that I worked at as well. So some of the Newcastle United first team players, they set up a private academy. So I led on that under 17 boys strength and conditioning. I got some sort of like volunteer roles at the uni as well. So working with men's rugby union, men's rugby league, women's basketball, some sport development roles. I was then also doing some part-time work to sort of pay for things, life and so on. So I was doing some athlete mentoring for British Athletics. I was doing some anti-doping education as well. And then I was also going into schools for a company and talking about my experience as an athlete, taking kids through a like a fitness circuit almost. So that was pretty much my first year, just really just saying yes to everything. And I think that attitude of just knowing what I had to do prior just prepared me. I knew it was going to be hard work for the next 2 years, but that goal of being able to work in something that I really enjoyed and something that I was really passionate about made it a lot easier, certainly. And I think just that attitude of saying yes, that also led on to other stuff as well. So I was quite lucky that on my course as well, the head coach for Newcastle basketball team, so Newcastle Eagles, Fabulous Flanoy, he's actually out in Toronto now, working in the NBA. But he was in my class and we just got talking, and obviously must have had some sad interest. He actually brought me in to work with the do the strength and conditioning for their men's team, because they didn't actually have anybody at the time. They sort of gone from EIS sport to then not really having too much. And then also the assistant strength and conditioning coach at Northumbria, she was working in a private gym, and she just said, would you be interested in some part-time work? So I ended up working in a private gym as well. So that first year, I basically worked with males, I worked with females, I worked with youth athletes, I worked with university level athletes, I worked with senior athletes, I worked with disability athletes within sport development stuff. So just really trying to get as bigger and as broader background as possible, so that if there was something that I particularly liked or something that I really wanted to go into, I would have that experience then to then be able to fall back on. So that was pretty much my first year. And but the biggest probably shock to me was that I was actually doing quite well in my master's as well. So I ended up getting a distinction at the end of my first year, and I was like, wow, like I'm actually really enjoying this. Like to start with, but then maybe there's potential to maybe even kick on, because it's almost so competitive. Like, I'm in a class here with 20 odd other guys and girls, and then there's all the other courses all throughout the UK. Like, it is super competitive for roles. So maybe I can potentially push this on. So there was an advert for a PhD role and sports scientist role at Liverpool, and I remember speaking to my course leader and then head of S&C, Joel Branningham at the time, and just saying, what do I sort of need to do now in this next year to be able to be in a position to apply for this role, and then potentially even get it. So did my CV, or maybe just rejigged a few things around, focused in on more research side, so dropped a little bit more of the work. So I really just dropped everything down to my part-time work. I started coaching the Newcastle ladies first team as well. That was through the uni. And then just pretty much just try to get involved with as much research projects as possible. So working with all the PhD students, working with as many lecturers as possible, just trying and get a bit of experience in that. Didn't really think of too much of the Liverpool role, but I did apply for it, but didn't really expect to hear too much from it. But then it was quite strange, probably about 5-6 months later, ended up getting an email saying, would you like to come for an interview? So did the interview, Jack Addy and Barry Just. Went quite well. Got through to the next round where we were going to meet at Liverpool training ground, and there was 2 roles. I think 3 of us were going for it, or were going for those 2 roles. Ended up falling through, I think, well, just purely because of COVID, right? Just everything sort of came to a halt from there. But maybe I'd impressed Barry, or certainly enough for him to be interested in working with me. So he actually had a role lined up at somewhere in Glasgow. I didn't really know where, but Jack he gave me the bad news. He said, we're not proceeding with this role, but Barry might have something up in Glasgow. Like, would you be interested? And I have no idea what it is, but I'm just like, yes, I would love to know more. And then again, didn't hear back for another 3 or 4 months. Finished my dissertation, and then got a call from Jamie Ramsden, head of performance at Rangers. Would you like to come for an interview? PhD lead on the youth development phase. So went up there, and I think just instantly I was like, this is the place for me. Like, this is 100% like what I've been working so hard to try and get. Did some research on the academy manager as well, and just everything that he was sort of saying was like, this sort of aligns with my sort of values. Like, this is somewhere that I can see myself really enjoying working. And I know one of the things that he said to me when I got the job was, what are you going to do when you come in that's going to be different? So what are you going to bring to the role that's different? He gave an example of one of the under 18s coach, Cameron Campbell, about how within his research he changed something within his team. And I was just thinking at the time, like, wow, that's like a big challenge. But actually, like, the amount of things that I've been through and the sort of journey that I've had is almost quite unique to me. So no, it's been a good ride. I've been here about 18 months now, and yeah, absolutely love it. It's brilliant.
What a fascinating insight. And I think you've just touched on something there that we've covered in previous episodes, in terms of a lot of people don't go through that thought process that you've just mentioned around thinking about whether the club aligns with you. Because in that position, when you get offered, especially when it's a club like Rangers, massive club, people probably would skip that phase, wouldn't they? And just be like, I've got this opportunity, I'm going to do it, without really thinking about whether it aligns. So the fact that and this ties in with the last episode with John Noonan and Josh Fletcher around values. I think it's really important to have your values, and then check out places like that, do your research. You can check out the academy manager, the coaches you're going to work with, and then it gives you more of a background, doesn't it? I think that's really important for people to hear.
Yeah, no, and I'd had a few sort of other interviews and opportunities around the same time, and the problem was that one was the first one, so it was almost like I went to the other ones straight afterwards, and I was thinking, I know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to go Rangers. So it was almost like this is the perfect role, and almost landed on my feet, almost really.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And you mentioned at the start as well, around not expecting to be in this role, like far from it. Was that the fact that you were an athlete at that point, and that was the sort of pathway that you saw yourself on, or was it that you saw yourself as a coach but maybe not in football? Like, what was the shock of ended up in football?
I think sport, definitely. I think having only really had a big growing up in South Wales, obviously rugby's a big sport. Not really into football in terms of my family, so that was never really on the agenda. Again, I think the university thing kind of put me off as well at the time. I'm not sure if I thought I wasn't smart enough, but definitely because I didn't apply myself because I was so interested elsewhere, that probably took away the opportunity to do well almost. And then, yeah, just my whole life was geared around athletics. Like this year, I would wake up in the morning and it would be, I'm going to have food, I'm going to go to the track, and I'm going to come back, I'm going to have food, I'm going to go back to the track, and then I'm going to coach. And it's like, that was literally my whole life. So I think when I finished athletics in, was it 2015, like really early 2015, like pretty much straight after the Commonwealth, I was almost like, it's like a big identity crisis. It was like, what am I going to do now? Like, I haven't got a clue. So yeah, like to see where I am now is almost like I'm still shocked myself, to be honest. But yeah, brilliant, absolutely. I think also I didn't really know much about strength and conditioning as well. I mean, I'd always enjoyed training, so the idea of getting fitter, faster, stronger. I think certainly the decathlon and athletics in general is quite a good background in that, because you're in the gym, you're trying to get fitter. So for example, the decathlon, you've got 100 meters, you've got the technical events, you've got the 400 meters, so you've got your speed endurance, you've got your 1500 meters, so you've got your more aerobic endurance exercises, but then you've also got all the work in the gym to get better at the shot, and the discus and the javelin. So certainly, like, it was a brilliant background. The actual coaching that I did gave me a good taste into, well, actually, I think I can be quite good at this. And then working in a builder's mission was almost like the best background I could have had in terms of building relationships, in terms of with adults. And then working in schools was almost like, okay, well, I can actually use that experience as an athlete and then building those relationships with kids when I actually go into schools, and can I engage with them. So yeah, strange how everything's almost lined up.
Well, I think there's a lesson in there as well, isn't there? That you just, like you said before, you say yes to opportunities. You scatter yourself around all these different opportunities, working with different demographics, working in a sport like yours where you're covering so many different physical qualities. That's only going to put you in a good position when you do maybe niche down a little bit and go into a single sport like football or whatever it is, isn't it? So there's a lesson in there for younger coaches, again, isn't there, that you put yourself in these opportunities, even if you want to end up in football, even if you want to end up in rugby, whatever it is, to work in these different sports, or with a sport like that, or in completely other industries. Is you just got to take lessons along the way, haven't you?
Yeah. No, and just put everything into it, really, because you never really know how it's going to turn out. Like I've gained things from every place that I've been, and every different internship was almost like a different learning curve. Like rugby union is very different to rugby league within the university. The women's teams are very different. So just take a little bit, and also you don't really know what's out there. Like everyone has this sort of idea that first team football is like the panacea, but actually, like, there are loads of other amazing places to go and work. And I think until you've actually been out there and experienced it, then you'll never know, really.
Yeah, 100%. Now let's get into the role at Rangers. So moving up there, I want to just get into some of the differences to start with. So Can you talk about some of the differences possibly from the Scottish academies to academies down here?
Yep. So when I was at Newcastle, it was relatively straightforward in terms of squads would train together, right? I mean, it's relatively straightforward. Like if you're the under 14s and they'll train together. Whereas up here, it's a little bit more broken. So every squad will be broken down into generally like performance schools. So Rangers have their own performance school. I think there's a few other clubs within Scotland. They've got their own performance schools, and they'll basically select players at under 12. They'll go through an interview process and they'll select players based on their ability first and foremost, but then also some of the psychological characteristics as well. Just to make sure they're getting good people in as well, because obviously the character of the group, making sure that people will gel together, making sure people are generally good eggs. So they'll come in at under 13, and then from under 13 within that youth development phase, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, they will they'll have training that they'll be split up. So they'll train, for example, Buckler boys will train morning on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they're our main acquisition days. They'll then train in the afternoon. So they'll train twice on that Tuesday, Wednesday, but then we'll also have another group. So we would refer them to as the evening group, and they'll train generally in their own performance school. So they'll be playing in the morning with boys from other academies, and then they'll come in after our Buckler boys and train on their own. So basically, every day, every group, there's a number of different, if you want to call it development models, almost different activity levels, different amounts of coaching. So, for example, Buckler boys will get generally about 40 minutes on the morning on a Tuesday, Wednesday, whereas performance school boys in the evening, they'll get around 2 hours, and then they'll come into us. Buckler boys might get between an hour on a Tuesday, and they might get towards 2 hours on a Wednesday, whereas the evening boys they'll train two hours on a Tuesday, 2 hours on a Wednesday. So different amounts of coaching contact, different obviously different players that they're playing with, different coaches that they're working with. They'll also have different sessions as well, because different coaches will have different sessions. They won't just repeat the same session. So already there's a lot of complexity. And then the only time they'll actually train together will be on a Tuesday, no, on a Thursday, Friday, and a match prep. So 13s, 15s will train on a Thursday, they'll play on a Saturday. 14s, 16s will train on a Friday, they'll play on a Sunday. So already you've got like completely different activity levels. You've got different opportunities as well. So Buckler boys, because they finish a little bit earlier, that might give them the opportunity to go and do other sports as well. So some of our younger Buckler boys, they might do, one of them does boxing, some of them, one of them has been doing athletics. So completely different in terms of the actual working week. And the first year that I came in, I was actually leading every session. So difficult to get your head around, because there is so many sessions. Most recently, probably about the last 6 months, and the guy Alex Neil, he's actually come in, so that's been a great help. So we've almost split up the 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, and we'll do a sort of split shift. So we'll go, one of us will be in the morning, one of us will then do that afternoon and evening session, and then we'll sort of flip it on its head. So quite complicated, and probably for somebody who's not in that sort of environment, it's probably a little bit difficult to understand. I think even guys who went with the 18s, they're like, don't know what's going on. But it certainly keeps you on your toes.
Logistically, it sounds like, let's not pad facts, it sounds like a bit of a nightmare, but I imagine there's a few benefits to it as well, because we talk a lot on the podcast about obviously different age groups, and we know like maturity and growth is all at different rates for different kids, isn't it? So in a way, without maybe going as extreme with that, we are dealing with kids at different stages anyway, aren't we? So the fact that you are having a mixed group, I suppose it's not massively different. But what about some positives from that as well? Is there anything that jump out in terms of like when clubs run more traditional academy models compared to what you do? Is there anything that jumps out and like, well, this is actually a good thing that we can take from what the cards that we've been dealt?
Yeah, I think originally when the sort of models were introduced, as if you like, so performance scores, the main idea behind it was just more contact time, right? So wanting more time actually getting in front of coaches, more time playing football. So I think at the time when it was introduced, maybe just after the ECLP, I think at the time it was quite big on in terms of that LTAD model, where that 10,000 hour early specialization, like just almost like that deliberate practice theory, right? Where they wanted them to have more contact time. I think certainly the performance school might struggle in terms of just the amount of time that they get, and certainly we don't have a great grasp on what they do there. I mean, we obviously have an idea. They're survey coaches, so they're really well qualified coaches. But just in terms of when they come here, for example, on a Friday, some of the lads might have done 2 hours of football. They might have done 2-3 hours of PE, which in some cases is actually true. And then they might do a match prep and train 2 hours as well. So within a day, they might be doing like sort of 5, 6, 7 hours. So it's a lot of activity. And certainly the evening squads are a little bit harder to get your head around. But I think what it's enabled us to do with the Beauclair boys is to really nail down on what we're doing with them. So really nailing down in terms of managing train load, really making sure that the sessions are very high quality. So a little bit less training time, but almost that idea of little and often. So more sessions, but really high quality. I think as well, one of the things that is really good with the Beauclair program is in the mornings when we go down, we will do like a physical IPT session. Well, no, we'll do an IPT session, right, which is basically like individual drills and skills and technical work. But within that, as a sports scientist, we'll actually have the opportunity to work within sort of 1s and 2s with players, and that's massive, right? Because most of the time you work with 20 players, so to be able to actually work in that small number, you can have that engagement where you can really give some detailed technical feedback. So I think the difference between most of the Beauclair boys and the evening boys, probably there is a bit of a difference in terms of some of their technical ability. So being aware of that, making sure that when you're in those sessions that because you do have a little bit more time with them because it's a 2-hour session, whereas sometimes with the Beauclair boys you might only have an hour. So making sure that you are sort of trying to balance it as good as best as you can. And then with the Beauclair boys as well, because again, like we've got a bit more control over that program, we'll go to the school on a Friday and we'll actually do multi-sport sessions. So trying to actually diversify a little bit, trying to actually give them more opportunities for more diverse movement. We'll introduce our weightlifting club as well. So actually we'll teach them Olympic lifts. So we'll go through all the progressions, all the regressions, all the of the cleans and the snatch. So actually we've only been doing it probably for about, well, it's been just under a year, probably about 9 months, with a break for Christmas as well. And we've got 14-year-old boys now comfortably with quite a decent technique, actually lifting like sort of 50-55 kilos in a hand clean. So certainly there's certainly benefits. Is it perfect? No, but I think people are aware of it as well. And I think hopefully one of the benefits, what might come out of my PhD as well, is once we've sort of, and I'll hopefully go through this a little bit more later, is once we actually understand what each group is doing in terms of their activity levels, we can actually then find out the impact of that. So what is the impact on performance? What is the impact on motor competencies? What is the impact on their development as a footballer? And then can we put any interventions in place to actually make some changes? So if we find that the evening boys are lacking in that movement competency, if we're finding that they are, for example, not quite as physically competent, can we put some interventions in place to actually change that? But yeah.
So let's get into some of your some of the information around the PhD now as well, but also and you might be able to tie this in a little bit too, the approach that you took going into the club, maybe some of the early changes that you made as well.
Yeah. So a PhD mainly does revolve around that sort of YDP group in terms of, well, actually, like, what are we doing with them? Like, we don't really know their global activity. So in terms of their training load, what they're doing at the schools, what they're doing in terms of PE, how that affects, what they're doing in terms of maybe extracurricular stuff, what they're doing then as a whole. So for example, is there big differences between the Buckler boys and the evening boys? Getting a gauge on sort of their global activity. So using things like accelerometers, using the actual, so we use player makers. So what they're actually doing within their sessions with us, what they're doing at the sessions within the performance school, giving them activity diaries to fill out, potentially using RPE as well. So getting that internal and external measures as well. And then once we've got that, we can sort of get an idea of obviously what they're doing, and then progressing that into some of the outcomes. So we've got our obviously performance tests. So speed tests of 10, 40. We've just got some new force decks, so we'll go CMJ and we'll go isometric mid dipole. We've got an easy jump, so we'll go 10, 5 RSI, and then we'll use a 30, 15. We use 30, 15 for the endurance, and then we'll also do a 505 as well. So that's the performance test. We also want to look at how they move as well. So some of the things that has come out recently from the guys down in Cardiff Met, I believe, Ben Pullen, they've just done a recent narrative review based on the sort of motor competency tests that are available. So actually in this environment, when you've got all those tests, you only get the squad together like once a week. So being really invasive with a full movement screen might actually be quite tricky. So what they sort of suggest is make it as simple as possible, make it as efficient as possible. And there's what's called a back squat assessment, where they just basically get a dowel. They'll do 10 repetitions, and there's 2 cameras. There's one at the side, one at the back, or one at the front. And then you basically just record and then you do all the analysis afterwards. So really efficient in terms of getting the whole squad through. And that's your sort of your fundamental movement in terms of that squat pattern. And then also a tuck jump assessment, where it's more dynamic, where they're looking at that more dynamic jumping ability, being able to land, being able to jump, not obviously letting those knees become valgus. So again, same process in terms of camera at the front, camera at the side, get a whole squad through very quickly, do the analysis afterwards. So reasonably comprehensive in terms of for how quick you can get through it. And then moving on, then we've actually just probably quite luckily, actually, at the same time, I wanted a measure of like technical ability, where we could sort of grade players. And when I first came in, we were sort of grading players based on A, B, C, and D. Whereas we've actually, well, the management team have actually put quite an in-depth document in place where coaches will get it, and then they'll be rated on various skills and various behaviors. And we'll then hopefully use that as part of their technical and tactical grading in terms of their footballing ability. So actually, throughout the year, when we grade them, is there that progression? And then again, is there a big difference between those Buckler boys and the evening boys?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think tying in with some of that movement competency stuff and going into some strength work would be good as well, in terms of how that factors what you then program, especially with the setup and like we've talked about logistics of having different groups in at different times. like how does that then factor and influence what you do in terms of programming the strength programs for the boys?
Yeah, so our main gym session would be on that Thursday, Friday when they're actually in together. So on a Thursday we'd have the 13s, 15s. Like I say, Friday would be 14s, 16s, and that would be their main gym. That would be their main gym session. So really trying to focus in on that movement quality. So always trying to move well first before we move heavy, before we focus in on strength. And basically the way that I've sort of structured the plan or the program is everyone will do the same in terms of the same movements from 13s up to 16s. But instead of being on like a movement matrix where you go from like level 1, level 2, level 3, and you progress through them. Because what I found was that if you spend too much time on level 1, and then you spend another 3 or 4 weeks on level 2, and then it becomes like you have to do the same session week in, week out, and then almost it becomes like, not that the effort goes, but it becomes less of a challenge almost, because it's like, I know I'm doing the same thing over and over again. Whereas, so I wanted to keep almost more variability, more variety, so they could get that breadth of challenge, but also have some stability within the program so they can still focus on strength. So for the 15, 16 boys, even for the 14s, to be honest, actually, if we're doing a trap bar deadlift, there isn't that much coaching involved. If we're doing like a goblet split squat, there isn't that much coaching involved. So picking exercises that are within that sort of squat, hinge, and lunge pattern, actually, we'll keep them the same for 4 weeks, and we'll strength monitor them first, and then we'll strength monitor them after 4 weeks. So hopefully they've improved, but then also then when we reintroduce the exercise, hopefully we've seen improvement in terms of their strength. But then on the other exercises, so if we're following that sort of fundamental movement plan in terms of we've got our hinge, we've got our brace, we've got our squat patterns, we've got our rotate. The other 5 exercises within a session. So if we've got 7 exercises every session, you've got a lot of exercises to get through. So it's very fast. There's no real standing around within a session. It's literally you're in and you're moving from one exercise to the other, and it's really fast paced and there's really high energy. So it's quite challenging in terms of that. But also every week it's sort of a little bit different. So instead of just doing a push-up week after week after week, actually 1 week it might be an eccentric push-up. The next week it might be a decline push-up. It might be an incline push-up. It might be an explosive push-up onto boxes. It might be dumbbell bench. It might be barbell bench. It might be a med ball push. It might be a standing med ball push. It might be a single arm. It might be a double arm. So it's still a push movement, but actually it's just slightly different every single week. So you have that same constant of, for example, 4 weeks you might go goblet split squat, and every session, because it's quite an easy exercise in terms of the competency, you can really push that. But then on the other exercises, for example, let's say it's an RDL, can you go dumbbell? Can you go barbell? Can you go single leg? Can you go split stance? Can you go good morning? So instead of like almost you get good at it, you get good at one exercise, you then move on to the next level, and then because you haven't done the other exercise in ages, you actually then almost forget what you're doing. So every session having to really dig deep and remember that movement plan, because it's slightly different. It's a bit more of a challenge. It's fun because it's different. And actually what we find is probably for the first two years, so under 13s, under 14s, there's a lot of coaching, like you're really engaged with the boys. But then once you get to sort of under 16, and we've been doing this for, I mean, I've been there about 18 months, but probably for the last year we've been doing this. And the under 16s now, it doesn't matter what we really give it them, because they've had so much variety in that experiences. Actually, there isn't that much coaching. Like, we're just there to sort of facilitate, and boys are just going straight into their split squats, and it's like, okay, great. They're going straight into their split stance RDLs. Okay, great. They're good mornings. Okay, great. Like, so actually they're getting that strengthness, but they're also getting that variety of movement where they're getting challenged.
It's really interesting and a really important point, especially working with those ages, isn't it? Because, well, one thing is that we're still fighting against that bit of a battle that a lot of people don't want to be in there, because it's just embedded in our sport. And I do think that is changing. But also at that age, we've got to capture their attention, haven't we? Got to capture their attention and keep things engaging. And I think that does that. And you've got your theme then, haven't you? Like if you're doing a push exercise, does it really matter if it's a barbell one week, a dumbbell the next? Like probably not. We're still challenging the body in the same way, aren't we? But to them, it probably seems a completely different exercise, being on a bench next to being on a bench press next to a bench. So yeah, I think that's a really important discussion to have, and the fact that you're keeping the consistency as well with the bigger lifts or maybe the heavier ones, then you've got that trend and something that you're retesting then alongside it, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, because you only get one main session. I think what I've tried to do more recently as well is try to actually space that strength work across the week as well. So okay, you've got that big strength on the end of the week, but actually on a Tuesday where we've got an underload session, actually we're not going to do a lot of conditioning, but actually can we use a little bit of time to do a little bit of maybe one exercise in the gym. So if we're doing, say for example, the theme might be deceleration, it might be change direction, on an intensive day because the pitch sizes are a bit smaller, can we do something related to that? So it might be a goblet lateral lunge iso, and actually we do 3 sets of that. It's very quick. You're in the gym, and it almost progresses on from that theme in terms of what we do from our prep, from our plyos into our sprint work, into our contextual sprint work, into the gym, and then straight onto the pitch. So actually they're getting strength in this throughout the week. It's varied, and then when we're coming into that gym session as well, there's no dead time because you only have one main session with a squad. So you've got to really make the most of it. So when I get them in, because it's new exercises, I'll demo every single exercise every session, so they know what they're doing, all the coaching points, and I think it sets the tone as well because I'm out front. I bring the energy to the session. I do demand for them to actually listen as well. I think that respect of, if I'm at the front and I'm teaching you something, sometimes you'll get boys who are they're laughing because it's the end of the week, right? But for 5 minutes, can you listen to me? Can you actually pay attention? I'll help you, and then from that, let's go and have fun. Let's go and lift. Let's be 100 miles an hour. Let's and to be honest, let's go and enjoy the gym, right? Because actually, like it should be a fun environment. So yeah, I think certainly making sure that time is as well spent as possible, because like I say, it is short, but actually when you use it well, half an hour can be really good.
And I wanted to ask as well, when you're going through this programming for the boys and your thought process, like what are you pulling from your experience of your training and all the sort of disciplines that you've been through that you talked about before? Because obviously you've got so many physical attributes that you're training there, and then you're bringing this creativity, this variability to these sessions. Like I don't know if I've just answered my own question there, but yeah, what sort of things are you pulling from your history as an athlete?
Yeah, I think that's good, because almost like when I was an athlete doing the decathlon, no 2 days are the same. Like yes, you've got a plan, but actually there's so much to get through. There's so much training, there's so much technical work that you need to get through. Like realistically, you need to be running every day, you need to be throwing every day, you need to be lifting weights every day. So there is a lot of variety in that. So I think just for myself, it was like, well, actually, like how can I bring some of that to my coaching as well? And probably the biggest thing is probably competition. So when I was competing, like I'm competing against myself really, because if I'm training myself, if I'm coaching myself, actually like every single day, I'm the one who's driving the session. Like I've got my targets in the shot. Like, so it might be 14 meters for the day. Let's try and hit that. And then in the gym, how much can I lift? So really trying to push on that. And I think also working in other sports as well. So for example, if I'm working with rugby, like men's rugby, there's some absolute monsters in there. And when I was down in Loughborough, there's some absolute monsters in there. And coming into football, it was almost like not disappointing, but like I want to actually create some guys who are like not just into the gym, but like really good at the gym. So, but not even just the gym, like just like I was almost like sports science S&C testing. So um we've actually got some boys in the under 15, 16s now who are getting like over, well, our best score in the 16s is just over 4 in the RSI. And then in the under 15s, we've got a boy who's actually doing 4.1. So actually really trying to get out of that almost competitive side and really try and drive the sessions. I think a big part of the way that I coach is really bringing the energy, almost cheerleading the boys. So if we're doing some running outside, um, when we first came in, it was like coaches led the sessions, and they would do like 3-minute mass runs, and everybody hates running, right? Everyone would much rather have a ball at their feet, and probably I was quite inexperienced in terms of when I first came in. I was desperate to go everything into it. I was desperate everything to be with the ball, trying to work with the coaches. But as we sort of alluded to, the logistics are almost too difficult. There's too many things going on. You almost just need to focus in on the real quality work first, and then you can sort of add in that complexity. So when I first came in, trying to dive into like GPS reports, trying to dive into like some of the metrics around high intensity running, and trying to really incorporate stuff when probably wasn't the best time to. So with the way that the football training works, they base that around the theme of the week. So it might be build, it might be possession, it might be transition, it might be finishing. And if you're working on sort of high intensity sprint distance, it's quite difficult to get in some of these themes. So for example, if we're working on a Wednesday, that's our extensive day. So bigger pitch sizes, bigger numbers, really trying to push those sort of speed metrics. It didn't really matter what we were doing in terms of the pitch sizes. It didn't really matter in terms of the numbers that we come back. And I think a recent paper, that one size fits all one did sort of show that it doesn't really matter what size pitch you've got, those metrics aren't really going to come through. So I try to design drills that were almost shoehorned in a way. Like they're not really good enough from a football perspective. They're not as good as just doing isolated running from that perspective. So you're almost like doing a little bit of both, and you're almost like the football coach isn't very happy because he's like, we're doing a build session and then we're doing more of a transition drill, because that's the only way that you can actually cover enough distance to actually get those metrics right. So actually transferring to more of that isolated drills, and then getting the players to buy in, actually getting them to understand why we're doing it, actually getting them to really work hard as well, and actually enjoy working hard. When I first came in, they used to be like, "Are we doing mass runs today? Why? I hate them." Whereas now, like, I don't know how, but they love it, and it's like things just like repeated sprints, short intervals. They don't mind too much, but their favorite session is actually the intensive tempo. So bringing that from my athletics background, actually covering it a decent distance, so working for about 10 seconds, but then getting a decent rest as well. So having that sort of 50 seconds off and then going again. I was out within about sort of 15 minutes, I was able to get like 800 meters of high intensity distance, about 300 meters of sprint distance. So it's super efficient. Boys absolutely love it because they're running fast, and actually because they're getting that rest period as well. They're recovering, so it doesn't really affect them too much for the session. Coach is happy because it's fast, and then I'm happy because I'm getting all those metrics as well. So yeah, just taking a bit of time almost to not do everything at once. Try and get quality first, and then when you are doing it, really really try and get the players to buy in.
Brilliant. David, there's been some quality stuff in there, so I really appreciate you delving into some of those topics. And there's still stuff that we said we were going to cover, and I knew we wouldn't get it all in, but I really appreciate you doing it. But I just wanted to finish with a few questions that we've had on other episodes, and just to wrap things up. So who are some of the biggest influences on your career so far? Is there any sort of names that stand out for you?
My dad's probably first and foremost the biggest. He coached me up until I was 18. He was in the RAF. He was a long distance runner for a long time, to be honest, and then stumbled into the decathlon through his work. And then I did other sports when I was younger, but he was a real driver in me doing athletics, getting into the decathlon, and then helped me achieve what I achieved as an athlete. So he was probably the biggest influence. And then I've had other coaches growing up. Probably what I take a lot from them is things that I shouldn't do, in terms of like, I've turned up sessions and these are like big important coaches, and they've been on the phones. Like, yeah. I'm in the middle of a session and they're on the phone, and they're not there because they've got other stuff to do. And it's like, if I'm coaching someone, they demand all my attention, they demand all the energy, all the passion, all the effort that has brought me to that role. So when I'm there, that's what I'm there for. So yeah.
Now, we said we were going to talk about like building culture, and without actually mentioning that word, I think we've covered it anyway, because I think what you've just said then, and what you talked about with you asking the boys to concentrate for the 5 minutes before going into the session, listening to what you're saying, I think those were two really important bits of experience, aren't they? Because we know that if you have been on the other side and the coach hasn't been 100% on it, you're not 100% on it, are you, as a player or an athlete? And I think it's important doing what you're doing, showing the players you care, and that you're there 100%. You're not elsewhere. There's some real value in that, isn't there? So without even talking about culture and using that phrase, that is essentially what habits like that are building, isn't it, in that environment?
Yeah, and I've got one example now. So this week on Wednesday, our extensive day, we had some mass runs planned in, but the boys, they actually came to me and said, like, we've actually got a really busy week. So we had a discussion before the session. They said, we've got Celtic on Sunday, we've got a tournament down in Fleetwood on Monday, that we've then got SFA trials on Tuesday and Wednesday. So actually, like, we've got a really big week ahead. So they were like, are we doing mass runs? I was like, first off, we're 100% doing them, but actually we don't need to do them, 3 of them flat out. So I gave them the sort of option. I said, previously what we've done is we've gone easy one first, we've gone the middle one really, really hard, and we've done the last one easy. So we're still doing 3 that's not negotiable, but actually the way we do them, how would you like to do it? And instantly they're like, yeah, sounds great, sounds really good. And then for that middle one, I'm on them, but the other 2, chill. And like instantly they're on board. They feel like they're part of the process. They've got some autonomy in actually what they're doing. And then hopefully come to the games, we're managing their load in terms of, it's not just me getting them to go through sessions. It's actually like a joint decision where we're working together.
Brilliant. And then what would you say your biggest strength is as a coach?
I think probably energy. Yeah, I think energy and probably competitiveness. I think competitiveness probably more so. I think it was actually funny. One of the other PhD students at Rangers, she leads the under-19 girls and works for the first team, Faye Bennett. She actually said to me, I don't know why she said it, but she said, "You're one of the most competitive people I know." And I said, "No, I'm the most competitive person that you know." So probably that.
That's good. Brilliant. Just finally then, mate, to wrap things up, I always ask people about CPD, about continued learning. What's your approach? Like, how do you go about continually improving yourself as a practitioner?
Yeah, probably a mix of a few things. So I've been down to a few places. I try and see people in person. So, for example, when when I was in my second year of uni. A guy called Paul Parker. He was working with West Ham ladies first team, and I was working with Newcastle ladies first team at the time. He came in and did a must have been a 4-hour lecture, 2-hour theory, 2-hour practical, and I was actually really impressed with him. I just thought, like, everything you're saying is like bang on. Spoke to him afterwards. I was like, would you mind me coming down to London to come see you work? And I was actually there for a week. So I went down to West Ham, was in that sort of environment, just sort of did the basic jobs, just in terms of handing out water balls and stuff. But just being in and around that environment was massive for me, to actually see how people not just talk about what they do, actually see what they're actually doing, see how they're interacting with players, and that was a big learning curve for me. Other ones are just generally just on Twitter, using YouTube as a sort of educational resource. So people are always posting papers on there, webinars throughout lockdown and so on. And then the other one will probably be just listen to books as well. So big fan of Audible. Probably the best book that I've listened to recently was one by Chrissy Wellington. I can't remember the title, but she's basically like an Ironman triathlete, and her life was like just like, wow, incredible. So yeah, one of those books where I was like completely captivated.
Brilliant, mate. Like I said before, some top information in there. So I hope everyone's enjoyed that. That was absolutely brilliant, David. Thank you for coming on. Just wrap us up. Where can people follow you? Where would you direct them to keep up to date with what's going on?
Yep, probably Twitter and LinkedIn, probably my biggest ones. I'm on Instagram, but not a massive poster, to be honest. But yeah, Twitter and LinkedIn.
Perfect. David, thank you very much, mate. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Cheers, man.